Meacher.
I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
The Government shares the aim of NHS funding for licensed medicines that are proved safe and effective, rather than patients paying private prescriptions for unlicensed products that are not assured by our medicines regulator. Now, broadening who can prescribe these products will not achieve this. For this to happen, we need the cannabis industry to invest in clinical trials. Our medicines regulator, the National Institute for Health and Care Research, have asked them to do so and are ready to support them when they do.
My Lords, the Minister will be aware of Bailey Williams, aged 20, with very severe epilepsy, who was hospitalised every week throughout his childhood until the last 4 years when he's been on medical cannabis. These have been his best years. His parents are struggling financially and asked Bailey's consultant to prescribe medical cannabis under the NHS. After all, NICE have approved this in their guidance. The answer is no, but palliative care. Palliative care was an option. My Lords, palliative care, but not a proven medicine that has done so well for this child for 4 years. The Minister cannot accept that situation. Will the Minister meet MHRA with me to discuss the way forward? There has to be a way forward.
Well, can I first of all thank the Noble Baroness for meeting with my colleague Baroness Penn yesterday. One of the issues I faced on this particular issue is that when I became a minister, the permanent sec recognised a potential conflict of interest, which I have been told I cannot meet with people, but I can answer this question if I declare it. So I better quickly declare it. I used to work for a think tank that received some funding for the medicinal cannabis industry, and I chaired a round table. That immediately ruled me out as having a conflict of interest. So I'm very happy to facilitate meetings with my colleagues and my ministerial colleagues. As Noel Baroness will be aware, there's a new ministerial colleague in place at the moment. But the point remains that we have asked the industry that make lots of money in this area to come forward and fund trials, and they've preferred not to do so.
My Lords, I understand that the MHRA are considering extending their compassionate access scheme, particularly in regard to the import of Silicea 20 from Israel. A number of children with rare forms of drug-resistant epilepsy rely on this medicine. So given the severity of the crisis of access to NHS prescriptions for medicinal cannabis, can the Minister ensure that there are no barriers to the MHRA acting now to extend this scheme?
The Noble Baroness raises an important point and is working with the importer of those medicines. What's happened, the MHRA is exceptionally continuing to allow those medicines, but hoping to convince to work with the importer, but also the Israeli company themselves, to see whether they would go through the MHRA approval process. And in Israel, they have two ways of products. One is for medicine and one is for cannabis issues. They've advised us that this is not licensed as a medicine in Israel, and therefore we're asking the company to come forward. But in the meantime, we're looking at an interim solution.
My Lords, the Minister confirmed that for certain very severe forms of epilepsy that affect children, medical cannabis is absolutely appropriate. Could he explain why only 3 such prescriptions have been issued?
Yes, and I should start by saying that I've been warned a number of times it's inappropriate for ministers to tell doctors and clinicians what they can prescribe. In certain cases, given that it has not been regulated as a medicine in this country, doctors can make that exception and ask for it to be prescribed on the NHS. They'll go to the CCG, and now they'll go to the ICS and ask for that. But in only a few cases has that been agreed to.
My Lords, will government heed warnings from respected addiction psychiatrists in US states where cannabis has been legalised that medical marijuana acted as a Trojan horse to get recreational in, that the upward trend in medical potency means people get addicted, and that super-strength products are associated with a significant rise in cannabis-related psychosis? Are they aware states are now tightening restrictions on cannabis prescribing, having previously liberalised, not least given sharp increases in teenage suicides with marijuana in their systems post-mortem?
Well, I thank my noble friend for the question, and I note the concerns, but I think we should look at this in 2 ways. There's medicinal cannabis and there's recreational cannabis, and we've got to be quite clear. Now, some people clearly want to liberalise both. I cannot comment on my own particular views because I am conflicted on this, but what's really important here is that we take a cautious approach and we look at the particular issue of medicinal cannabis. The government is ready to, MHRA are ready to regulate medicinal cannabis. It just needs the companies to come forward and spend that money on the trials.
My Lords, the Select Committee of Science and Technology, which I had the honour to chair some 15 or 18 years ago, looked at the medicinal uses of cannabis. And one of the things we clearly showed was a statement we've just heard is not true. In fact, there was no evidence then, that the medicinal use of cannabis led to addiction in patients, and indeed, patients who were having medicinal cannabis, in fact, were trying very hard not to become high, and were really trying to use the doses in very limited amounts so that they could cure the symptoms they were after.
Well, I think the Noble Lord makes a very important point. We have to distinguish here, whatever our personal views are, between recreational use of cannabis and medicinal cannabis. We know from observations and many stories that many people believe that they benefit from medicinal cannabis. We know because the companies haven't come forward to have it regulated or to go through the clinical trials, there's a barrier, but we're trying to work with those companies and encourage them to come forward. In fact, we have also found some NIHR research money available to help those trials. My request to the industry is you make a lot of money out of this, please come forward and go through those trials with the MHRA.
There is a suspicion amongst those of us who think the government is being very slow about this, that the government is arguing it from a medical point of view, just as the Noble Lord the Minister has today, but in fact this is a political decision from the government because its right wing doesn't like the idea of cannabis use in this way.
I don't know how to respond to that. All I would say to Noble Baroness is that nothing could be further from the truth. This is clearly an issue based on medicinal cannabis. No Baroness will know that my party is a coalition. There are quite a number of libertarians in my party who would take a very different view on banning these issues. What's really important is that to be licensed as a medicine, you have to be approved by the MHRA. To be approved by the MHRA, except in very exceptional circumstances, you have to go through trials. These companies make a lot of money. They can afford to go through the trials. They're just choosing not to.
My Lords, thank you very much. My Lords, NICE has actually supported the limited use of medical cannabis. It has, over many years, supported the limited use of novel drugs in cancer and heart disease, which have been readily available. Does the Minister agree that it is a national scandal that we are discriminating against some of the most vulnerable people with severe epilepsy in our country by not providing this in limited forms on the NHS pre-further clinical trials?
Well, what I would say is on a number of occasions, it is left up to the doctors. The doctors are able to ask for it to be prescribed on the NHS. In some cases, clearly that is not being accepted, and that's why they have to go privately. But the best way to solve this problem is for the industry to come forward and to go through those trials. The offer is open. The NIHR has money available, but for some reason, the companies prefer to sell it unlicensed.
My Lord, isn't there a way around this?
Oh.
I asked the question, isn't there a way around this? It seems to me extraordinary that we can't cut through this.
In simple terms, I completely agree. There should be a way around this, and I've got to take this. I will take this back to the Parliament. In fact, I was quite provocative with when I was getting advice on this. But I've also been warned I'm conflicted on this particular issue. So I'll try and push as long as I'm not seen as being in conflict. It's a very difficult thing, but I want to do the right thing.
My Lords, we will look forward to the Noble Lord the Minister returning on this point. But to build on the points made by other Noble Lords, despite the change in the law, many families are experiencing great anguish in getting treatment for young epilepsy sufferers and are left with little option but to pay thousands of pounds each month. So what is the government's view on implementing all of the recommendations of the recent NHS review of the barriers to accessing prescription cannabis products for medicinal use? And if not planning to implement all of the recommendations, which ones are the government looking at?
Well, the department has been reviewing the Hodges review and has been looking at the method of data collection. At the moment, I cannot comment on the significance of the statistics in the report, but the important thing I think here is, once again, we are asking the industry to come forward. They can fund the trials, they can afford this, but for some reason they prefer to sell it unlicensed.
Just to clarify the point that the Minister made, that it's not for him to tell doctors what medicines to prescribe. Is he really saying that if doctors are failing to give their patients the proper medicines, the adequate medicines, the only medicines that work, that there's nothing he can do?
These are left to clinical decisions, and it's up to individual doctors. Some doctors believe that the evidence is not there to prescribe it. Other doctors believe that it is there and they would like to prescribe it. They go to their local CCGs or elsewhere and they're not given permission or access for that. What we're trying to do is make sure that there's sufficient evidence, but we really do need the companies to come forward. If I can make one appeal to noble lords, anyone who contacts you from the industry, ask them to come forward and go through the trials.
Third oral question, Baroness Armstrong of Hilltop.